You rule out striking civilian
I
infrastructure?
think I saw, guys, I saw Arachi, their foreign minister, who the other day say or something about their policies, an eye for an eye. The president's policy is a head for an eye. I mean, honestly, that's what it's going to be. I mean, they will pay a very heavy price for the things they're doing. They're already paying a very heavy price. You guys don't know it because you don't cover it. You're not in Iran. You're not in the street. They don't have a free media. But they're going to continue to pay a very heavy price. So they're probably not ready to do a deal yet, but they will be soon because the price they're paying is very high despite their tough talk and their flowery language and their stupid Lego videos they put out. I've never seen them, but they put these things out on social media. Despite all that bravado, they are suffering tremendously, and they're going to suffer more until they come to their senses. They're not there yet, unfortunately.
That is Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking earlier today with the press on the sidelines of the ASEAN meeting of foreign ministers in Manila. And yet again, somehow, he manages to represent the conduct of the United States in its on-again, off-again war with Iran in clear terms. Rubio can make almost anything make sense. And that's a tall order these days, when it's hard to know from one day to the next if and what is America's plan and strategy regarding its war, entanglement, frisson, disagreement, you name it, with Iran. That's what I speak about today with military expert and analyst Andrew Fox. After reading his superb written piece a day or two ago on the lack of a clear American strategy, I thought it's time to bring him back on to State of Tel Aviv and beyond. You can find the link to Andrew's piece that I was referring to in the show notes to this podcast. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wednesday, July 22nd. It's 11:45 in the morning in Israel, 9:45 in the UK where you are. Andrew Fox, thank you so much for making time for State of Tel Aviv and beyond.
Well, thank you for having me, as ever.
Always a pleasure. And you look, for those of you who are listening, he looks healthy and tanned and very much in summer mode. So, Andrew, you put out another fabulous piece. They're all fabulous, but some are even more fabulous. It was a few days ago. I'll put the link to the piece in the show notes. Your focus for this piece was on Iran, America, and what the heck is going on. And if I can distill it to one sentence, it was pretty much the Americans need a strategy and they need to execute that strategy, or they need to get out because what
Yeah.
they're doing now is not going to work. So why don't you expand on that?
Yeah, well, it starts. I think we need to tell people just what we're talking about. Let's clarify our terms when we talk about strategy, because the word is thrown around all over the place. But in a military context, you're talking about something very specific. So you start with the aim, which is political. Okay, we go back to our Clausewitz, we go back to our early 1800s, where war is politics with the admixture of other means, as he said. So it's a political thing. You don't just go to war to bomb stuff. You have a political goal at the end of it, which usually means that military is working in conjunction with economic and diplomatic as the three great levers of statehood, statecraft. So you have the political goal, and then you have a military strategy, which is essentially what are the ends, what are the goals you are using these bombs and tanks and troops for, how is that contributing towards achieving the political goal that your politicians have articulated? And then beneath that, you've got to look at the ways and the means you achieve those ends. In other words, do you have the resources that you need? Can you come up with a rational course of action that will lead you on that journey from where you are now to the end point your politician wants you to be at? So it's all very well for Trump to say, right, we're going to end the nuclear threat from Iran. Okay, now let's look militarily at how you do that. They've got a bunch of sites. We know they've got a bunch of uranium buried. We know they've got Pickaxe Mountain where they might be refining. We know they have scientists. We know they have universities. Okay, so how as a military are you supposed to get to an endpoint from where we were at the start of the war to completely destroying their capability? So when you stop dropping bombs, how do you make sure that, for example, that they don't just start over? They don't just train more scientists and mine more uranium and refine it and keep their missile systems going? You know, how do you get to that point using your armed forces? I would argue at this point that you can't. You need to use also diplomacy and also economics, which is what we've seen up to this point in terms of deals and things like that. The real problem here is that the Iranian regime are not rational actors. They are Shia 12 jihadists who believe that for the hidden Mahdi to return, the great Satan and the little Satan have to be destroyed and Islam has to take over the world, and then the Mahdi will come back and redeem Islam. That is not compatible with sitting down and making a deal saying, don't make a nuclear bomb. And that's the mess that Trump has got himself into, because you can have all the strategy in the world, but the other side get a vote as well. And so what I think we're left with is two options. You either have regime change, or you pay them a lot of money not to do what you don't want them to do through some kind of a deal, or you walk away, or you just maintain this kind of bombing forever. And that can't work, because the world economy is going to collapse if the Strait of Hormuz stays shut. We're in a minor economic blip at the moment as we get towards winter and fuel demands go up. Global reserves are already down where they were in the mid-80s. Like, the global economy cannot sustain that lack of oil supply. So Mr. Trump has unfortunately waded himself into a strategic quagmire, and finding a way out is going to be extremely difficult.
It's interesting because, of course, you bring in some of the foundational great thinkers of modern warfare and set out the kind of components, the basic components that a rational leader, regime, government, whatever it is, would look to as they develop a war strategy. And Trump is not, as I see him, among the more rational and linear in this regard. His strategy seems to be erratic, if it is a strategy. He's very volatile and very personality based, right? So, the Iran war starts, he attacks, we did it. Well, it turns out you didn't finish the job. They go back in, and he's speaking of the regime in very strong terms, suggesting from time to time that the regime has to go, even though that's not officially one of his war goals. And then all of a sudden, they're great guys. The new regime, as he calls them, they're great guys. I really like them. They're not like the old crowd, and we can do a deal with them. I don't want to sound disrespectful, but I mean, it's almost silly talk. It wasn't a new regime. It was the same guys. And a week after that, he's calling them scum. So on the one hand, you lay out the kind of elements, components of a very thoughtful, rational approach to war. But does that fit with what we're seeing from the Trump administration?
No, I mean, I think you've answered your own question in many ways. I don't think it does. I think there's a number of problems with the Trump administration in how they've done this. First of all, I think is Hegseth. I think him at the Department of Defense or War or whatever he wants to call it is a problem. I mean, this guy is obsessed with the kind of vet bro culture that we saw sort of in the early 2010s. And it was a joke. It was all about, how you went pew and how, you were tactical. And there was a whole, there's a guy called Matt Best who did loads of videos on YouTube joking about being an operator. And it was a joke.
I gotta say, I was not aware of that culture.
Yeah, it was an army subculture at the time,
Okay.
but it was a joke.
Okay, time out here. The vet bro culture that was apparently a thing among certain military guys in the early 2010s, I drew a blank. And I was curious. So I asked Andrew to send me a video that conveys the vibe, tells me what it's about. And he's right. It's painful to watch. So I've spared you. It's a spoof on a real culture that exists, this vet bro culture, which is really way over the top macho. And it celebrates ogling and pawing women in the skimpiest bikinis printed with American flags. Lots of filthy language, tattoos, binge drinking. You get the drift. Ouch. Okay, back to Andrew Fox now, picking up on his point about Secretary of War Pete Hegseth being a part of this super alpha military subculture.
And unfortunately, this guy has taken the joke and made it real. And you've got a pew operator who thinks he's tactical sat in the Pentagon. And that's no place for someone like that. You need a measured, serious, grown-up thinker. And this guy just doesn't have the qualifications or the experience, quite frankly. And I'm hesitant to criticize him as a former major, because of course that's what I am as well. But at least I went away and then got a bunch of degrees after my military service to qualify me to talk about this stuff. above and beyond being an army officer, but never did that. So I think he's a real problem. I think the yes man culture they've created in that White House is a problem.
Right.
They've sacked an awful lot of generals who don't agree. And actually, one of the things we train in our basic officer cadets at Sandhurst, the British West Point, or I should say that West Point is, the American Sandhurst. We train our young officers to embrace, countering views, because that makes you a better thinker if you can incorporate the other side's argument and build a more structured defense of your own thinking. And they don't have that right now. Because there's no way the American military didn't have a plan or didn't know about Hormuz and then didn't think that would be a problem on day one. They must have known. And yet somebody in that chain has gone, nah, irrelevant. We don't need to worry about that. So there's some really poor groupthink, I suspect, going on at that administration. And I think behavioral scientists going forward, particularly military ones, are going to have a whale of a time analysing this war, of all the cognitive pitfalls that the White House has fallen into when it comes to this campaign. But it looks like a car crash from where I'm sat. And I'll throw you the two things that people will come at me probably back out in the replies. The first one is finish the job. We just need to finish the job, get rid of the regime, free Iran. It's like, cool. Like, articulate how you get there. Like, that's what nobody at this point has done. Because look, you can squeeze them economically. Yeah, you can put a counter blockade on Hormuz and make them, economically extremely poor. Okay, so that's going to hurt ordinary Iranians. That might cause the regime to collapse internally. Then what? Like, they're the only ones with guns. They have nearly 1 million men under arms. Nobody else has any weapons inside Iran. And so if you do get the regime collapsing or falling apart, you're going to get probably a sort of internal power struggle, a civil war. Lots of people are going to die in the crossfire. Nobody who's any good, i.e., force of good, is going to have any weaponry or be able to have any influence on this. Like, what next? Nobody is thinking this through to the finish.
Yeah.
That's the problem we've got here. Is like, what happens at the end of this? Nobody's able to say.
I want to talk about something that I find fascinating and I think is underexposed in discussions about the situation in Iran with America. And that's President Erdogan of Turkey. So apropos what you were just saying, okay, so you do all this military damage, you create economic turmoil, but nobody has guns other than the 1 million Basij and IRGC guys running around and doing what they do. There was a plan, though, and I don't know much about it, but I know that there was a plan and it was in place, and it involved activating the Kurds to come in to Iran from the north and to basically act as an insurgent force to destabilize. They have arms, and to likely activate sleeper cells within Iran to create some sort of armed resistance challenge to the regime. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that plan was part of the big plan when America decided to go in. And on the eve of kind of flipping the switch to get the Kurds going, Erdogan phoned Trump and said, don't do it. And I won't get into all of the reasons for why, but we can suffice to say that Erdogan has always been a kind of arch rival enemy of the Kurds. And he would not want them to have that kind of place alongside America in the Middle East. He does not want to see them empowered or legitimized in any way. There are, 23, 24 million Kurds in the Middle East, I think.
Spread across 4 countries. Yeah.
Spread across Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And many people aren't aware of that. They are a huge group and they want their own country. And I think there's in total, including the Kurdish diaspora, there are about 50, 60 million worldwide. So just for our listeners' sake, I just want them to be aware of this isn't some kind of fringe little group off in the mountains. These guys are very large and powerful and well-armed and well-trained and tend to be secular, and they have women in their armed forces and all that.
We do need to just chip in and say that not all Kurds are the same, in the sense that there are some actually very dodgy and unpleasant subgroups in there as well. I think that's important to acknowledge.
Not a monolith, but I'm trying to kind of do the big broad brushstroke, so thank you for that, keeping it real. In any event, Erdogan steps in, he calls Trump, and he says, don't go in there. And Trump says, we're good friends. I like you. So, and he comes out and says that. Like, he tells us that, Erdogan asked him not to. And the next day he's trashing the Kurds and saying, all they do is basically he calls them mercenaries. He says all they do is they want money. That's all they want. And they're not reliable and this and that. So the Erdogan factor in all of this is huge, huge. Tell us how you see it influencing President Trump and what the Americans are doing or not doing.
The Turkish, unfortunately, are a lot more of a power player than we would like them to be. Look, geographically, they're unique. They straddle Europe and Asia. Historically, in the 20th century, they were extremely secular. Under Erdogan, they have unfortunately taken a bit more of a religious Islamist bent, certainly on the Muslim Brotherhood kind of pathway. They have an exceptionally powerful armed forces. They are real players. The Bayraktar drones were probably some of the first really effective battlefield, remote control suicide drones that we've seen. And Turkey was a real leader in that space. They are a member of NATO. They're an associate EU member. If not, they'll never be a full EU member because Greece will always veto. But they are certainly an EU member in all but name, which gives them a huge amount of sway. And unfortunately, with Erdogan, he has sort of neo-Ottoman ambitions. He'd like to restore, very much in the way that Putin would like to restore Russia's sphere of influence, if not the USSR. Erdogan would like to restore Turkey's old Ottoman sphere of influence, if not bring the Ottoman Empire back. And we're seeing, that Turkish influence in Syria that's done down the Kurds, who are a separatist group who want their own region away from Turkey. And obviously that is totally incompatible with an ambition to have a nationalist expansion of your influence. Now, we know about this plan for the Turks to be some sort of ground invasion force in Iran through I think it was Wall Street Journal article, or was it New York Times? I can't remember which, but it was one of the big papers. Obviously had it leaked from the Vance camp. We know that because Vance comes out looking like a superstar and everyone else comes out looking a bit shady. So you can pretty much tell where that leak came from. But I do think it's credible as an account of what happened, because there was, I don't know if you remember, right back on day 1 or 2 of the war, there was a lot of chatter from Trump broadly on the ground. The media class were chattering about the Kurds. Now, I spoke to people who have links directly to the ground, and they denied it at the time as well. So there's definitely some mixed reporting here, but I think broadly, the plan that Bibi sold to Trump did include that ground operation, because I think it was very clear that on the first couple of days, regime change was what they wanted.
Yeah.
They didn't articulate it, but I think that was very clear from everything circumstantial to that they wanted a regime change if they could get one. If they couldn't, fine, we'll keep going.
Trump even let it slip once or twice in kind of the early days that, yeah, well, sure, like regime change. Yeah, okay, whatever. Very non-committal.
And you don't wipe out their leadership on day one if you don't want to remove and replace them. So, it makes perfect sense. And ground forces would look like, in that plan, the good Kurdish groups, not the psycho ones, because there are some proper psychos. The Baluchis over in the east, on the border with Pakistan. You've then got the Azeris, a number of other sort of smaller clusters of ethnic minority within there. I think the issue with that plan always, and I wrote this at the time, was that all of those groups have links to other countries. So the Azeris to Azerbaijan, the Kurds to Turkey, as well as Iraq, Syria, and then the Baluchis right on the Pakistani border. We saw in the early days the Pakistanis, I think, moved a brigade or a division, I forget which, to that Baluchistan border just to make sure that nothing happened that would destabilize their side of the border.
Right.
So when if you're going to arm all these groups and get them to take over, you're basically creating a civil war from scratch and drawing in other regional players. I think it's a bad plan for that reason. I was skeptical at the time. I'm still skeptical. But it does, again, though, leave us with that core problem, is if you're going to remove the regime or make them collapse internally, what comes next? And there's still no answer to that.
Yeah. And so now you've raised, of course, the Israeli involvement, and it was definitely in the New York Times. It was the Maggie Haberman, John Swan reporting.
Yes.
And I've also been through the book as well. And I mean, they're fantastic reporters. As Maggie Haberman pointed out in one podcast interview I heard, she said, so far, nobody's come out and said that anything's untrue. It's an incredibly well-sourced, well-vetted book. And that was a kind of very obvious but touche point, that no one has come out and said they're lying or they don't have the right sources or whatever. So, but the Israel connection, it's not a secret that Israel is involved throughout the region for all kinds of reasons, was likely key in developing the Kurdish option and likely advocated that. based on their reporting, that's what happened. But I'll just present it as a kind of, possibility, suggestion. And then that didn't happen. And it was from that point, when we can now look back in retrospect, that things really began to unravel between Trump and Netanyahu. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, is this another one of their like psyops, fake outs, right? Because we'd been kind of, for months at that point, what's going on? Right hand, left hand, assuming that there's some kind of higher strategy being played out, which I'm not sure there was. But we get to that point, and then the rift between Netanyahu and Trump kind of blows open, right? And we have Trump saying publicly, he doesn't know what the F he's doing. He has terrible judgment. He's too trigger happy. We have Vance saying, you can't kill your way out of every conflict. So the tone of the administration towards Israel has changed significantly. And Netanyahu has clearly been reduced to, he's in the penalty box. Like, there's no question. And when this latest round of attacks by America on Iran broke out, for the first few days, Bibi was like, I'm here, I'm ready, we're on high alert, I can help with it, whatever you want. And there were no takers. And I think that for Netanyahu, that's somewhat humiliating. I think he sees it as being in Israel's interests, aka his interest, to be an active participant in the attacks on Iran. But he's not. He's very much relegated to being a bystander. Why?
Look, I think Trump wanted a quick win. I think Trump was promised a quick win. I think they were hoping for a Venezuela replay where everything's in and out, done, 48 hours, huge victory. Thank you very much. We saw that at the end of the 12-day war.
Yeah.
Midnight hammer with the B-2 strikes on the nuclear sites. That's what Trump wanted. I think that's what he expected. Didn't get it. And obviously, Donald Trump can never fail.
But that was true of the March. Sorry, but that was true of the March-April period. Do you think that was true when he went back in now?
Look, I think they're in a quagmire now. They don't know how to get out of this. And Trump can't, psychologically can't accept the humiliation.
Yeah.
So he's doing what he knows how, which is hit stuff and smash stuff like a toddler having a tantrum.
Yeah, it's react.
Yeah.
It feels to me very much moment to moment. Like, oh, you killed 2 service people or 3, so we're just going to hammer the crap out of you, which is exactly what happened. And well, what about diplomacy, Mr. President? We're still interested in talking. We're always interested in talking. But in the meantime, we're going to keep smashing them, right? Until they come to their senses. And again, back to your opening comments, we're not dealing with a rational actor. There's always this assumption in the West that we're dealing with a rational, linear actor. And the truth is that the mindset of the leadership in Iran is the mindset of the leadership of Hamas. They actually don't care about their people. They don't care if they suffer. What they care about is surviving and maintaining this, fundamentalist, theocratic chokehold on the people who seem to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very rational, their thinking. It's just not rational in a way that we would recognize it.
It's rational if you put yourself in their kind of world.
In the mindset of a psychotic jihadi. It's rational if you can manage to do that.
But it's not rational in turn. Like, rational to me, and the way in which I use it, is linear, logical,
enlightenment thinking. Yeah, I get it. The scientific method. Yeah. And then look, this is the same thing we've seen for 2.5 years in Gaza, and that's what I talk about in my article. It was always one more push, one more operation,
exactly.
one more, just one more, and Hamas will collapse. And the hostages came home because of the Gaza City operation. Like, no, they didn't. They came home because Trump bribed Qatar and Turkey. And the Gaza City operation was because I think Bibi knew that was coming and needed a military win to trump it, which is exactly what he and Derma have been doing about that operation, by the way. But it's the same fallacy of logic. Like, we just need to bomb them just that little bit more, one more bomb, and they'll crumble, and the whole thing will come crashing down, and we'll go to the sunlit uplands of a friendly Gaza or a friendly Tehran. It's just, it's fantasy stuff.
Yeah, got a lot to say about that. And the one more day, one more Hamas brigade. And it's like whack-a-mole. I mean, but that's for another day. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Rubio and how he plays into this, because he has been, in my view, a very crafty, clever player in all of this. I mean, it's not even Teflon, it's beyond Teflon. How do you see Rubio?
Look, I struggle in the sense that I'm not a politician. Clearly you are, or have been at least. Yeah,
I
like
operate in the political sphere.
yeah, my brain doesn't work that way. Like for me, the fact that he is going along with Trump in spite of everything Trump said about him and his wife, in order that Rubio, can then have a really good run at president. Morally, I struggle with that. Like, I couldn't do it. I physically would rather walk away completely than do what Rubio is doing. And that speaks for my absolutely subjective opinion. That is a huge moral failing from Rubio. You can see it when he's in meetings. I always remember the Zelensky ambush in the Oval Office. You could see that Rubio knew it was wrong and he did nothing. And that is moral weakness, moral cowardice in my book. But he is clearly the only one in that whole administration with half a brain, and who is, all other things notwithstanding, sound politically. Like, he is a good traditional conservative Republican that, given, remove him from Trump's sphere of influence, I'd love him politically. We're very aligned, the morality of his behavior at the moment aside. So, but that unfortunately is politics, and it's why I'm not a politician and never could be, because I would never have the ability to even go a tenth of that. So that's where I stand on Rubio. I think he's the grown up in the room. He is, all things considered, it's good that he's there, because I dread to think what it would be like if there was yet another lickspittle who was just going along with whatever Trump said.
And I think I love that word, lickspittle. And I also think that's exactly why he is there. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, because if he wasn't, God help us. And, apropos your comment of, okay, yeah, he sat there in the room and he didn't say anything, didn't object during the Zelensky meeting, but there was Vance jumping in, just pouncing for the kill.
Oh, far more loathsome in every respect. If it's a choice between Vance and Rubio, it's beyond a no-brainer that you choose Rubio.
One would hope. But in this day and age, I mean, you live in the land of Andy Burnham.
Yeah.
So
The quiet coup.
yeah.
The vibes Prime Minister.
Andrew, it's impossible, but I have to ask the impossible. How do you see the near term playing out in Iran?
Well, let's look at the clocks that are running here. And I love a clock analogy. I use it all the time in my writing. I just love it. I love the idea of clocks racing against each other. And there are a number spinning here. The first one is the world economy. That clock is really starting to spin now. America has the midterms coming up. This is going to be felt at the gas pump, at the supermarket. The inflationary boom is going to be a real problem. It's a minor thing right now. As soon as the weather takes a dip, fuel demand goes up, real problems globally on that one. The next clock is the interceptor stocks. So we know from CIS did a study of how many interceptors have been fired, and they worked out in the first phase before the MOU, % of the world's interceptor stocks were fired, and they will take 40 to 50 months to replace. Okay, that's a huge problem, because Iran still has the ability to fire. Those missiles still need intercepting. That's going to run out sooner rather than later. So that everyone will be thinking of that as well. Offensive stocks, I spoke at the start about strategy and needing the logistics to complete your mission.
Yeah.
Like, even offensive stocks are going to be starting to be drawn down here. You need rare earth minerals to replace this stuff. You cannot surge rare earth minerals, because China controls 90% of the global supply. So China has a say here in terms of throttling the resupply that's needed for new missiles and bombs. So those clocks are all spinning. Internally to Iran, you have the economic clock spinning. Will they collapse internally? What does that look like if they do? Nobody knows. I'm not going to make a guess. There's the internal tensions within the regime, because Khamenei, the older one, was essentially the capo di tutti capi. He was the head of a massive mafia operation. Now he's gone. All the internal kind of factions are now duking it out. That could cause some sort of internal collapse. Who knows? So all of these things are ticking at various speeds. Feels to me like there will be another deal once Trump has had his toddler tantrum and has smashed up another load of Iranian stuff. I suspect there will be another period of talking, because there has to be, because we're going to run out of missile interceptors and the world economy is going to go off a cliff if we don't. So I don't see any other outcome at this stage other than more talks. When that will be, you can tell me once Donald Trump's finished throwing
Okay, and we
billions
also
of
have,
dollars around.
the approaching midterms and all that good stuff.
Mm.
The price of oil has already started to creep up. It can't, the consumer simply can't sustain it for long. But what we're hearing talk of now, and I mean, in Israel, we know that the international airport in Eilat has been basically overtaken by the American Air Force, and that Ben Gurion, the main international airport that services the country and the civilian population in central Israel between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, is kind of overrun with American Air Force jets, combat jets, and refuelers. I think there are something like 40 on the ground now. They're talking about bringing over another 10 to 20. At the peak of the operation in March, April, there were 60-ish. The airport here, the Ben Gurion airport, the main airport in Israel, has said, we can't handle this. We cannot operate as a civilian airport while accommodating the Americans. And I'm not hearing anything about the Americans kind of shifting, moving, whatever. So we know there's a buildup. I don't know, maybe you do through your channels, if part of that buildup includes B-52s. And so the question, of course, is, so are they considering dropping those bunker busters on Pickaxe and other locations? I mean, we know that so many launch sites were taken out in previous iterations of this conflict. And we also know that they've literally dug them out again.
Mhm.
This is months later. It's just extraordinary. So we know that those, little speedboats that they use to kind of threaten in the Strait of Hormuz, I've been hearing and reading that they've been at dock, that they're not using them anymore. They're not buzzing around the strait. So whether that's because they've all been destroyed or the Iranian Navy is just kind of sitting back and letting things play out rather than, imperil what they have left of their Navy. So that's what we know or think we know, that there still are missile launchers, that they've kind of docked or lost control over some of their seacraft. But here's what we don't know. How much of a role is China playing in keeping them going? Because they just seem to have endless capabilities to launch missiles, to threaten an attack. They've been going at the Gulf states and, interestingly, not attacking Israel for, a few weeks now in the kind of the most recent iteration of this combat. Somebody's got to be in there propping them up. Somebody's got to be funneling material to them. Russia's not really in a position to do it because they need it. China is just sitting there on piles and piles of weapons and oil reserves and other things. Do you know if China is actively in there propping them up? And while you're doing that, I also want you to address, I was aware, of course, of the concentration of rare earth minerals in China. I did not understand it to be so high, 90%. I know that Canada also has many rare earth minerals that are used in defense components, and I would assume that Russia and Ukraine do as well. So just, if you can, give us a brief kind of lowdown on if and what role China may be playing in keeping Iran going. I would think against all odds, but apparently not. And just kind of go back to the rare earth mineral equation and how much of a chokehold China has, and how much in an interim period, Canada, Ukraine, Russia, Mongolia may be able to supply.
Yeah. So, in terms of Chinese support, we've seen transporter aircraft coming in from China. Obviously, we don't know what was on them, but we can take relative guesses. You've also got the routes that China has through northern Pakistan. There's an opportunity for ground resupply as well. And also, like, missiles and rockets aren't that hard to make. They're really not, compared to some of the really high tech stuff that we see.
Right.
The stuff that Iran's firing really isn't that complex. And also, look, Iran is huge. It's almost
Yeah.
continent sized. There's no way they've struck everything since the war started.
Yeah.
The country's just too big. I don't think people quite often understand just how big it is. And also, when we look at, the massive ordnance penetrators, those bombs that were used at Fordow and Isfahan back in the 12-day war. Look, the Israeli Air Force told me in January this year that Fordow was still operational after that. Okay, so it didn't completely wipe it out. And then when we look at Pickaxe and how deep that is, I would be astonished if it can be struck.
How
you know,
deep is pickaxe?
I mean, I don't have the details of that to fingertip hand, and I don't think anyone really does in the public sphere, but it's going to be deep. It's under these granite mountains,
Yeah.
really hard to strike from the sky. And Fordo was a mountain as well. From what we know, pickaxe is even deeper because that's what you do. Look, if the enemy's hitting you from the sky and
Right.
tunnels are the only things that save you, you just go deeper. It's not rocket science. Well, it is because that's what they're doing there. But, you will just dig your tunnels deeper until it's so deep you can't bomb them anymore.
Fordo
Which,
being operational, though, I mean, that's news to me.
yeah, well, that was straight from the Kyria.
I'm not questioning it, but we've got Trump running around saying it's buried
Yeah.
under rubble. Who knows if they'll ever be able to dig it out?
I mean, it was damaged. It was damaged, but it
Yeah.
was still operational.
Okay. So Fordo is still operational. If you wouldn't mind for, people like me, a little remedial, you said that, we can guess what the Chinese are transporting in the air shipments. I can't. What are they transporting in airplanes?
Oh, I'd imagine it'd be munitions, components, air defenses. I'd imagine they'd be trying to get some of those back in. And we have actually seen air defenses in action. There's video of that on the internet just in the last few days. So the idea that Iranian air defenses are wiped out is nonsense. They've shot down huge numbers of MQ-9 Reapers. So even if they haven't really touched many American aircraft, I think the current US aircraft kill leaders are still the Kuwaitis, but the MQ-9 fleet has taken a real battering. So there's air defense you'd be pushing in, and potentially large amounts of money as well.
Right.
You'd be flooding cash in there to keep the economy afloat. If they're not doing that through crypto or other means, that's the other thing here is that there's so many tentacles that the regime has, so many different ways of keeping their cash flows going. Cutting them off completely, yes, you can hurt them with oil, but they have other means to keep going in spite of that blow. So that's really challenging. And what was the final part? Oh yeah, the rare earth minerals. Yeah, so 90% of the stuff needed for weapons comes from China. Look, Ukraine doesn't have anything it can mine. I spoke to a South African very rich person when Trump was forcing that deal on the Ukrainians. And he said it was a joke because it costs more to mine that stuff than you can sell it for. It's just not in a place that you can use right now. It's basically a hedge bet against sort of technological improvements in future that allow you to dig this stuff up in a profitable manner. So there's nobody else that really can do that.
What about Canada and Russia?
I'll be honest, there is a gaping Canada-sized hole in my rare earth minerals knowledge. I'll have to go and check that out and get back to you.
Please do. And Russia?
Russia, again, not tracking it, but 90% is the figure I've read. China's the only one that can provide this stuff right now.
I'll go with your 90% then. Andrew, as always, thank you so much. Always fun and interesting and eye-opening speaking with you. Appreciate you being here.
Likewise, anytime.
And that is a wrap. Thanks for being here, as always. As we record this on Thursday evening in Israel, there's lots of speculation on the news as to whether, when, and how intensely President Trump will scale up the attacks on Iran. He's saber-rattling very consistently and pretty emphatically. And he's still talking about a deal. I just hope that someone is paying attention on the other side. Until next time, stay safe. Thanks for being here. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to Vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Szabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.